Good afternoon and welcome, and thank you to everybody for joining us. My name's John Copps. I'm from Mutual Ventures, and I'm very much looking forward to today's discussion where we're going to be talking about local Get Britain working plans. We're going to be talking about what has been learnt from the process, where's everyone up to, and what next for local areas. So Get Britain Working is the government's call to action to address unemployment and a range of underlying issues in the labour market around ill health, skills, and the quality of work. And local plans are an acknowledgement that these things differ by place and that local problems need local solutions. Every area, led by combined authorities where they exist or groups of local authorities where they don't, has been asked to produce their own plan. And at the same time, ICBs were asked to produce work and health strategies. We all know that there's a massive set of issues, of huge challenges underlying these plans to deliver 80% employment and to tackle the more than 2.8 million people who are economically inactive. They're tough goals, but they're a real chance for us to lift a burden on local economies and public services, and also, crucially, to help individuals and their families to live happier, healthier, and more fulfilling lives. So I'm delighted to be joined by three guests to discuss where they're at with their plans and what next for delivering them. Given the emphasis on joined up working between work, health, and skills, we've deliberately got a mix of guests from different parts of the system. So let me turn to our panelists who will introduce themselves. Good afternoon, Jessie.
Hi, John. Great to be here today.
Could you say where you're from and what your role is?
Yeah, sure. So my name's Jessie Leigh. I have the brilliant job title of being Programme of Care Lead for Work and Health in the Cornwall and Isles of Scilly Integrated Care Board. And that's a pretty unusual role to have in an ICB. So it gives me a strategic remit for joining up everything work and health across our system. And as part of that, to deliver our trial Workwell service.
Wonderful, wonderful. And hello, Isobel.
Hi, John.
And could you say where you're from and your role?
Absolutely. Hello, everybody. So I'm Isobel Brown, as John says. I'm the Programme Director for Enterprising Cumbria. So my remit is almost like the economic delivery arm of two local authorities, Cumberland Council, Westmoreland and Furness Council. And Enterprising Cumbria is basically has a remit which probably originated from what would be the old local enterprise partnership days. And as we transferred over to council sort of functions and services, and as I'm saying, we deliver those economic programmes across all of Cumbria.
Brilliant. And Lauren, hello.
Hi, John. Good afternoon, everybody. My name's Lauren Newby. I'm a director at GC Insight. I've worked in economic development consultancy for some 25 years now, and I've got a particular specialism and interest in labour markets and skills. So a lot of my work focuses on evidence-based research, strategy development, case making for development and investment. And I've been busy working across the country in recent months, supporting various local authorities and their partners to develop their local Get Britain working plans. And as part of that, I've been instrumental in developing three Get Britain working plans, including Cumbria's, South Midlands and Swindon and Wiltshire.
Brilliant. Well, it's great to have you all here. And our speakers are here to give their views, but I think I can speak for them to say that they're approaching this with a bit of a sense of humility and a realization that what works in Cumbria or what works in Cornwall might not work exactly in your area, but we're here to share ideas and to share insight. So as well, we'd really like to hear from you. So there's an on-screen Q&A facility if you want to ask any questions. Leave your name if you want to, and we'll get to as many of those as possible. You can also in there share your local Get Britain working links to your local Get Britain working plans, and I will distribute those afterwards if you're happy to do that. Brilliant. Right, let's get into the discussion. So to kick us off, perhaps I could start with you, Isobel, and ask where you're at with your local Get Britain Working Plan, and what are the key tenets of it?
Absolutely no problem at all. So where are we? The plan's in draft. It's in very, very final draft stages. It is going to our Work and Health Board on the 8th of December. So it's not yet been published. And the members of the Work and Health Board will have an opportunity to work the way through that, comment on it, suggest edits, amend it, all of the things you would expect while it's still at draft. Thereafter, the plan will go to our Joint Executive Council in January. That's public meeting, and basically that's as most areas will know, the leaders of both councils. We have two councils, as I mentioned. So the leaders of both councils, the deputy leaders, the chief execs, and all the senior, officers will get to see that plan at that point in time. And then it becomes a public document going into the end of January thereafter. Our Work and Health Board is chaired by one of the the deputy leader of Cumberland Council, and it also who has responsibility for children's services, and it is also with members from the both ICBs in the area, DWP, Job Centre Plus, the voluntary sector. You can imagine it,
Hmm.
employers and everybody that has a vested interest in getting Cumbria working. It also has a portfolio holder for Westmoreland and Furness Council, and that's on adult services. So we hope we're covering the whole gambit from early years all the way through, to over the life cycle of someone's working life.
Yeah, and we can get into some of the governance around some of these as well. Can you say a bit about what's in it?
Lots of stuff. It runs almost 90 pages at the minute. So there's lots of stuff in it. There's lots of evidence in it, and you can imagine, but it's built on the premise of a number of working principles, I would say. So in terms of collaboration, so we've had workshops, we've had a number of inputs from, many, many people. It's built on partnership. We're looking at participation, empowering all partners to be engaged and heard. And it's probably one of those great co-produced pieces of evidence, right? We've got an economic analysis of inactivity in that report, and it does have KPIs, and it does have focus in terms of, where we will, go first of all. It does outline things like the priority cohorts of the groups that we will tackle first of all. We're probably focusing in on the next 2-year period, so that by that point in time, for those who don't know, Cumbria is on a journey just now to become a mayoral combined authority, and that is likely to happen early in 2026. So it's important, although we won't have mayoral elections until 2027, but we will become a combined authority, early next year. And it's important then, if we focus in the next 2 years with partners, it will allow the mayoral elections to happen in 2027, and for the mayor to be in post and to help us then look at, a focus, thereafter.
Yeah, grand. Well, we'll come back to some of those themes in a bit, I think. Jessie, where are you at in Cornwall?
Oh,
And what are
yeah.
the key things in the plan?
Thanks, John. Well, I should say it's Cornwall and Isles of Scilly. Isles of Scilly, however, already has 100% employment, so we're very much kind of focused on Cornwall in that reaching the 80% employment rate target. And as you know, because Mutual Ventures have been providing brilliant support around the learning and change of Workwell pilots, we have a really long-standing collaboration in Cornwall between work, health and skills partners that made that bid, and that we've formalised into our Cornwall and Isles of Scilly Work and Health Partnership, which we sort of think of as effectively a bit like a place-based joint work and health unit for Cornwall. So that aims to provide executive support to our big regional economic partnerships. largely led by Cornwall Council with an economic forum and a workforce and skills board, and our health partnerships, the integrated care system side of things. And we work under a sort of strategic commission that we encapsulate as good work for good health and good health for good growth, to really recognise and cement that understanding that we need a workforce that is healthy if we're to drive good growth in our economy, and we need good work for people, because worklessness is so strongly associated with higher risk of illness and increased risk of mortality. So it's really important to both of those aspects of our regional vision for Cornwall. We are lucky in Cornwall because we have largely coterminous administrative boundaries, which is quite unusual. That won't entirely last the course, because of course we're clustering as an ICB with Devon, but for quite some time we've had a sort of all partners with a single administrative unit of Cornwall to focus on, which does make that collaboration a bit easier. What it also shows up in stark relief is when government is commissioning different bits of regional infrastructure to do broadly the same job, which I think you gently alluded to in your opening thing around the relationship between Get Britain working plans and work and health strategies. So when this first came out, we were sort of looking at a situation where the local authority was being tasked with producing a Get Cornwall and Isles of Scilly working plan to join up work, health and skills, and the ICB was being tasked to produce a work and health strategy for Cornwall and Isles of Scilly to join up work, health and skills. So it took a little kind of stepping through that to work out how we were going to do it, but we were all felt that it didn't make sense to have sort of two competing plans for the place, and that this would be rather counterproductive to the mission of joining things up. So in the run up to the summer, we decided to incorporate both accountabilities into a single strategic document.
And when do you expect to publish, Jessie?
We're expecting to publish in the new year, probably in February, when we've got Apprenticeships Week and some of those big national focuses on employment in the sort of national celebrations. Yes, it is. But we're very much looking, I think, at the plan as the framework around how we work as being an ongoing one. So you were right to say that we enter into this with a level of humility, as I think everyone entering into the debate at national and regional level is. The challenge of economic inactivity, and particularly health-related economic inactivity, was rightly recently described by Charlie Mayfield as a quiet but urgent crisis, and no one has any silver bullets for this. So key amongst partners' commitments around how we deliver on that plan is that we have both the outcomes approach, and if anyone hasn't yet checked out, Mutual Ventures have a brilliant dashboard for looking at your key outcome metrics for your place, but also that kind of annual review and annual plan setting, so that we're learning and adapting as we go. And within that, I guess, building a bit on some of our learnings from practical delivery on the ground and trial of the Workwell service, which has been brilliant. We are looking at how we can take some neighbourhood team-based approaches to joining up work, health and skills, which is perhaps a bit easier done in Newquay than across the whole region.
Yeah, well, I think that's great, Jessie, and let's come back to some of those things as well. Lauren, so looking across the piece, across the country, where do you think we're at with overall local Get Britain working plans?
Yeah, I mean, as you sort of said, John, in the introduction, where you talked about the guidance. So that guidance for developing local Get Britain working plans in England was published in April. There was an ambitious timeline for producing those plans by July, and where that wasn't possible, an initial summary of those proposals was required by the end of June, with a view to then developing the full plans and publishing these by September. So it's fair to say that this was an ambitious timetable, given the lead time that was needed to develop new and evolve those existing partnership structures, to develop the detail of what was required to fulfil the plan requirements, particularly within that summer holiday period. So in reality, whilst there has been a small number of plans shared and published throughout that period, many have needed to take that time to build that capacity and to integrate that strategic thinking across partnerships. So in total, I think 42 geographic areas set to publish local Get Britain working plans. So, whilst some initial plans, I think maybe circa 6 are in the public domain, not all of these have published, to date, and it's understood that by where we are now, so in November, I think it's fair to say the majority of those plans are well on their way to being finalised, but there's obviously governance to go through. I'm aware that there's a number of published reports. So we've got, the Solent, that was one of the early ones to see published. London, Kent and Medway, Tees Valley, by way of example. But many of these plans, they do emphasise they are work in progress. They represent a sort of first edition of a plan that will continue to evolve as further work is undertaken. And I guess, in many ways, producing these plans has actually possibly been the easier part. There's considerable work to do, particularly in terms of establishing that governance, the shared outcomes that we've just talked about, the data sharing approaches, and fundamentally undertaking that necessary system redesign. Lots still to happen in this space, it's fair to say, but it's good to see some of them being published and to take stock of some of those common themes and shared challenges that we can see across the piece.
Yeah, and we'll send around some links to the ones that we know exist after this, and some of them are in draft. And I think, as Lauren said, that it sounds like the bulk of work's been done. It's just there's governance to go through often. Can we pick on some of the themes that all of you mentioned, actually, and let's talk about how you've managed them. So one of the key requirements in the plan for it to be whole system, unified understanding of the goals, and then the partnership, which Isobel, you really emphasised. So how have you managed that, and what's different now to it was? Let's go back to April.
I think what's different now is that we actually have a unified vision and view of what needs to be done. I think bringing the partners together has been really, really valuable. Getting their input into the developing priorities, listening to what many groups have had to say. I mean, we are close on the back of development of a number of strategies in Cumbria. So, of course, the partnership relationships are really quite strong. We've had the Cumbria economic strategy. Both councils are producing economic strategies, which are, close for their sovereign areas and very, very close to, fruition. So the partnership side of it, has been absolutely key to bringing people on board and listening to what needs, what partners need and where we believe we can actually bring something added value to, to make a difference to residents. In Cumbria, we've got close to 60,000 people who are inactive, which represents about 20% of the working age population. So it's quite a significant, number. Bearing in mind that we actually have, many, many vacancies that we can't actually fill. We've got significantly large employers who are, crying out for staff and growth. And if we can actually find some way to match that inactivity with the vacancies, then it could have a significant impact on the economy in Cumbria.
And that engagement piece, so when it comes to, you just mentioned employers, how have you tackled that? Because it is that's a tough challenge, isn't it?
So we have an economic growth board that was set up about 18 months ago, just as Enterprise in Cumbria came into life and fruition. And that growth board represents many significant employers in the area. So they've all been supportive of the developing programme. That growth board reports into the Joint Executive Committee, as does the Work and Health Board. We've been very clearly tasked by both councils to make sure that there is engagement and roadshow type of approach to, getting the word out there. And I think that having the links from the universities, from the what I would basically class as we all would class as the anchor organisations, and having I presented to Anchor Organisations Network last week, and having those anchor organisations as conduits into, the work that we're doing and the plans has been, critical, and I think in making these targets achievable over the following number of years.
That's great. And there's a question in the Q&A for you around, do your plans link into the Better Health at Work award scheme? Is that a...
Yeah, I think they link into lots of things like that. So the answer to that is yes. And they also link into, the ICB has had some money locally, the North, because we have two ICBs. So there's a number of other programs that they've had money to do. And we've had sessions to make sure that we don't actually, almost like target the same people, but there would be handover situations. And we're trying to map out just now these programs and how they actually, where the baton can be passed across varying programs and varying groups, and the support for all of that.
Thank you. Yeah. So Jessie, picking up on the partnership theme, a big challenge here is culture change, isn't it? It's the silos that we know exist in work, in employment support, in health, in skills. How does your plan tackle that?
Oh yeah. Well, I always think there's a big. I'm really glad you've raised culture, because we can often focus on plans and governance in the sense of process, when culture is what really makes the change. And I think we are looking at least at a 5 to 10 year program of culture change here. I think some of the positives, health, it really features in these, and upstream preventative support to keep people in work in the first place, not just to help those who are a long way from the labour market, is kind of front and centre of the whole get Britain working and keep Britain working agendas. So locally, we've seen health be invited onto the Workforce and Skills Board for the first time, and we're seeing health as a key driver of some of the of the Work and Health Partnership. So that's really positive, and I think there's more to do to drive a change of culture within the health system, of focusing on employment as a health outcome and as a health intervention. So we know that worklessness is really bad for your health. It's really bad for mortality risk. But quite often, there could be a stronger culture across the whole health system of focusing on employment as a health intervention and a health outcome. We know that when people are in work, they report better health. And actually, for things like mental health, employment's about the only intervention that has an evidence-based long-term reduction in need and demand for mental health services. So I think some of those shifts are really important. So within the health system, the sort of association of professional bodies has put out a consensus statement earlier this year. Top amongst that is the focus on every health professional should ask the work question. So are you in work? Is your health affecting your work? And that drives completely different conversations, which can lead to completely different outcomes for people.
Yeah.
But of course, that's just within the health system. And what we're talking about here is getting a whole range of different organisations to join up. And that's, it's easy to when you're sat in a place-based, I've worked in central government as well, it's easy to look and say, well, it's siloed in the central commissioning, which is true. But it's also really challenging in practical terms to drive collaboration on the ground, because people are working in organisations that have different cultures, as you say, but also different operational pressures, different ways of measuring performance and setting targets, different governance and data systems. Data sharing can be a real barrier. So we're really quite excited about, I mean, there's two ways of trying to drive that. One is big picture, and absolutely having all partners at a strategic level sharing a common vision is really important. But some of those practical challenges and cultural shifts we feel are probably best made at a neighbourhood level. So that's what we're looking to drive, is that join up between teamwork and health in place.
Yeah, okay, that's good. And so, Lauren, just looking across at some of the other plans and the ones you've seen, the ones you've been involved in, I'm just reading a few of them. They all talk about the health system taking a central role in enabling work. What would you pull out from them that kind of is significant in that area, or commonalities between some of those plans?
Yeah, I mean, I guess if we were to maybe look at some of those common priority actions that we've seen across the country. So the plans, as you'll be aware, you were given, there was no set format for the plans, but there was that flexibility really to develop plans in a way that drive that maximum impact within the areas. So that kind of appreciation of those specific local issues within those areas, and that health dimension comes into play really, really strongly within that. So getting that critical alignment with the various different aligned strategies, whether that's local skills improvement plans, local growth plans, as we've talked about, so those work and health strategies, integrated care strategies is really important. So we've certainly seen across those plans, we've got a lot of shared challenges in terms of what areas are experiencing related to labour force participation, progression in work, and the impact that certainly poor health is having in terms of participation. In terms of those priority cohorts, again, looking across the piece, clearly the guidance gave us steer in terms of some of those cohorts they anticipated seeing in there. So disabled people with a health condition were included in that. So as you would expect, the plans do provide a response to identifying some of those barriers to participation that those groups are experiencing. And we've certainly seen that those with long-term health conditions are consistently highlighted as a priority cohort across all the plans that we've seen. So I think when we're thinking about some of those common priority actions that we're seeing, certainly looking at the kind of no wrong front door integrated support provision comes into play. A lot of the priority actions talk about piloting activity in that space. It's really interesting, Jessie, to hear from your experiences and how you then take that down to the neighbourhood level. There's a lot of focus on employer engagement as well, recognising particularly some of the challenges that SMEs are experiencing in terms of actually offering this support. So quite a common sort of focus in terms of both inclusive recruitment practices, but also how you support people with those health conditions within work to help retain them in the workplace. And that's quite challenging in terms of some of the barriers that stop those small and medium-sized enterprises in terms of offering that support. So we can see some good practice that bigger employers are able to support, for example, around that occupational health offer. And what we're seeing in plans is looking at these types of interventions and looking at ways in which a support offer for the SME community can be rolled out.
That's a theme, actually, Lauren, that somebody raises in the chat. I don't know if you saw that.
No.
How you define significant employers, because they're saying that their area is dominated by SMEs who struggle to engage and may sort of lack sight across the system, if you like, so aren't in a good position to integrate things. And I don't know, Jessie, this might be one for you because I know Cornwall was named as a vanguard area in Charlie Mayfield's Keep Britain Working review. So that's his review into how employers can support people with health conditions to stay in work. What's your sort of view on engaging with SMEs particularly?
Yeah, it's critical, and I'm glad I can't see the chat, so I'm not sure which area, but Cornwall, perhaps similarly, we are predominantly small and micro businesses. We have extremely small numbers of what would count as large employers, and we also have a lot of the sort of more unusual forms of employment, seasonal work, sole traders, the gig economy. And so that means quite a lot of our workforce is not covered by any form of employee assistance or occupational health programme. Doesn't mean the businesses don't care. And in fact, some of the most innovative and values-driven support for workforce can be found in some of our small businesses. And Charlie Mayfield was really impressed by the innovation and commitment that he heard from small Cornish employers when we hosted a round table for him earlier this year. But it is a challenge in terms of budget. So and of course, so I'm also a director on the Cornwall Chambers of Commerce, and we know that it is a really tough time for businesses right now. Some of the changes in national insurance have impacted on kind of employment, and there's it's a tough time out there. So what we have found, if it's of any use, is practical support. Is really important. So two of the ways that we're doing in engaging employers, two of the ways we're doing that is we've just launched a Good Business Pathfinder hosted by Cornwall Chamber of Commerce, which is kind of like a directory of resources, tools that businesses can use for all sorts of factors involved in being a good business, but including people and workforce. And specifically around this agenda, we've been incredibly fortunate to be selected as a Workwell pilot region. So, when I'm talking to businesses, I essentially frame the Workwell offer as being a light touch, completely free, fully funded form of employee assistance, because it offers that early upstream coaching and support to people who are in work but struggling because of their health, or who have recently left work because of their health. It's entirely confidential, so in that sense, it can be more effective than employer hosted solutions, because Charlie Mayfield rightly talks about the issue of fear, and the fear that staff can feel in disclosing to their employer that they're struggling in work because of their health. Workwell's entirely confidential, so that kind of takes that out of the equation. And we've also added, I think uniquely in Cornwall, to our pilot with some digital innovation. So we've launched a Workwell mental health app, which is freely available to any resident with a mental health struggle affecting their work. And it offers that kind of anytime, anywhere digital therapeutics, tools and techniques for managing stress, anxiety, and common mental health issues. So we found that that's a really good way of engaging employers. We're building a network of Workwell employer champions. And what is attracting them to this is there's something in it for them. There is a free, fully funded coaching service and app, mental health app, to support their staff and help them, help their staff stay well and productive in work. So I think that would be my top tip, really. Think of it from the business perspective and what's in it for them and why should they engage.
No, that's great. And just sort of still on the topic of employer, there's a question from a colleague who's working on the Get Oxfordshire working plan. And maybe this, Isobel, this is one for you. They ask about the labour demand analysis in the plans. So what does the economy need in terms of skills and employment? So how have consultations with local industry and regional employers been part of that, and actually making sure that the demand that that kind of the support meets the demand in the economy?
Sure. So that was a separate piece of work that we did from the actual writing of the plan. We did the economic activity or inactivity across the whole area. It's a significant piece of work, and it does outline exactly, I mean, like almost like down to postcode level and street level where we have, I mean, people who, require support. I think that, my bit in there, like Jessie said, and, Lorna have said, some of those areas that we're all grappling with is around, the SMEs. I mean, while I mentioned we have, a number of vacancies, but these vacancies with some of the larger employers can dominate, the swing in terms of employment, and not every small employer can, offer the support that a large employer, may have an ability to, to support. And one of the things that, we've got a number of employers who've come forward and said, well, we're prepared to pilot some things. So, for example, one of the local employers, this is just one at the moment, one of the local employers is piloting no written applications. So that basically people then come for an interview with, I mean, they register, they come for an interview. There's absolutely no requirement to fill out an application form, no requirement to give a CV, no requirement to do any of that. And it's much more of a, and that's in the hospitality industry. And it's much more of, that one-to-one relationship being built. I think it's really, really important that we look at things like, I think as one of my colleagues there mentioned the LSIP. Absolutely, the LSIPs are being refreshed for 2026 and the role of employers in that and about what the skills requirements are critical to making a success here. And if you look about the broad spectrum of programs that, I mean, most areas will run. So not only do we have the LSIP, not only do we have, front door services in terms of the way the councils operate, we've also got the career service, we've got the skills boot camps, you've got the, like business support services to employers. And it's about looking about how do we engage employers without actually turning them off. Because if everybody goes to the same employer at the same point in time or one after the other, we have to have these employers on our side, especially the SMEs, and work in harness, work with them and harness their commitment to making a difference with the workforce in the area.
Yeah, and thank you, Isobel. And just looking across some of the plans that have been published, and Lauren, maybe this is one for you. There's the concept of good work features quite heavily. So what have you seen around that, and in terms of how areas are approaching ensuring the work is quality and sustainable?
And well, it's quite a good sort of segue on from what Isobel was talking about, really, because I'm very mindful of the role that anchor institutions can play in this space, and we've seen that recognised in plans, that how they can really support this process through being good employers. And perhaps something that Isobel can come on to later is the actions underway to develop a Cumbria commitment, which is sort of picks up on that theme. But with regards to sort of good work charters, there's lots of good examples out there, isn't there, where we're trying to advocate good work and what those principles mean in practice. And certainly just sort of reflecting on some of the things that it means in the space of Get Britain working plans. It's about that, looking at the flexibility, the security of work, the employer voice, staff development, inclusive recruitment practices, equality and diversity. So there's a lot that kind of comes into play that's directly relevant to what we're trying to achieve, the visions and the objectives that we can see articulated within the local Get Britain working plans, and they're tailored to the specific circumstances of those localities. So I think, again, in terms of when we look across the priority actions and some of those common themes, there's often a keen focus on good work charters by way of example, how we leverage anchor institutions in terms of leading the way, in terms of what that means in practice, and then kind of how that can flow down as well in terms of sort of social value commitments, procurement opportunities, and so forth. So yeah, there's certainly a common theme there, and there's a lot to go at, particularly when we're seeing major investment flowing into these areas, and then it provides that sort of demand responsive approach to trying to align our skills needs and demands more closely, and how do we actually unlock that labour supply that exists within that inactive population to try and fuel inclusive economic growth in these localities.
And on that point, some of the other unlockings, the sort of latent, that in a number of the plans, it talks about the enablers of work. So, and I imagine, Isobel and Jessie, this is particularly important in Cumbria and Cornwall, things like transport and childcare. So how does that sort of fit into your plans? So Jessie, you want to go first?
Yeah, I can do that whenever we have a conversation and businesses really see this. Housing as well, housing affordability in Cornwall is a massive challenge. And yes, digital connectivity and transport connectivity in a place of many small remote settlements is tough. I think I'll just take one step back as one of the other characteristics of our place and link to what we were just hearing about, kind of the question around good work. We actually, our good business, we ended up with a good business pathfinder rather than a charter, because businesses told us they didn't want another accreditation scheme because there are already so many. We're fortunate to have more B Corps than anywhere outside London in Cornwall. So hence a toolkit of resources instead. But within that, I am particularly passionate. I'm the Chamber's representative on our real living wage working group for Cornwall. We are accredited, first region to be accredited as going for real living wage place status. That's a tough challenge, but it's really, really important, because a key attribute of good work is decent pay. Especially somewhere like Cornwall, where housing is very expensive and transport costs can be very high. And I think this is where, if we're challenging ourselves on and our organisations on what we can do better at, pay, especially at the bottom end, is key. So Cornwall Council was one of the first local authorities in the southwest to be accredited as a real living wage employer. That's really important, because it doesn't just mean every member of staff employed by the council is paid the real living wage. It means it's driven through all of its contracts. And of course, there's a lot of people indirectly employed by councils in social care and other areas. If they're on decent, if they can afford to heat and eat, their levels of stress and their ability to be in good physical health is going to be a lot greater, and to sustain work as a result. I can't say the same about NHS employers. So I think there is a sort of challenge for national and regional leadership around, we know that poverty wages drive ill health. So where's our commitment to ensure that we are driving wages that are adequate to live on and support people to be in good health?
Yeah. And Isobel, in terms of transport and some of those enablers in your geography, how does that sort of link into the plan?
I think I feel Jessie's pain, right? In terms of, rural economy, we probably across the size of Cumbria have 5 key employment sites, and outside of that you're into a rural economy with transport, bus difficulties, all of the above. Yes, we have mainline train going down, the West Coast line. But there are, and we've got the coastal railway network. But, moving from, if you go from Carlisle in the north down to, Barrow in the south, you're over 2 hour drive. What happens when, if you're offered an apprenticeship and if you're younger and you can't drive, you've not got a car, how do you get down there? How do you get to, and likewise from Barrow up to Carlisle, how do you get there if you start at 7 in the morning and it's a 2 hour drive, let alone, public transport just, doesn't work at all. So, we've been looking at, almost like a transport voucher system. How can we put something in place that may, if you can get to one of the 5 key employment sites, how do you get there? How can we encourage people to car share from there? How can we encourage, that voucher scheme for employers maybe to look at, running, buses at a reduced cost to people? It's difficult, and that one is not an easily answered one. Because you can't change the basis of your geography from where, from what it is. And likewise, affordable housing. There's a St Cuthbert's Garden Village, just slightly on the ring road at Carlisle. 10,000 new homes planned to be built. The Barrow, if you're aware of the disadvantages and that Barrow as an area has had over the last decade and beyond. There's 12,000 homes planned for Barrow. There's targets in terms of affordable housing. We have, we've got one of the, like Cornwall, we've got an amazing visitor economy in terms of 42 million people coming into the area as day visitors, people with second homes. That it almost ousts people from living in the area because of the lack of affordable housing. We've put targets in. The councils are working really, really hard to try and look at that balance. And these are the things that we genuinely have to look at in, across the piece. Some are not quickly answered, but others are not, and others are not the responsibility of the Work and Health Board. But nonetheless, we actually have to be sharing where the issues are and looking to see, how can we actually make amends and make inroads into some of these, these elements.
Yeah, no, I can hear the sort of challenges there, and just interesting because this may apply to you both as well. You mentioned the big visitor economy. I guess that drives a level of seasonality in employment. How do you manage that? In the context of a plan, because how is that good? How do you manage that?
Yeah, that's really tricky, and it's highly localized as well. So that I think lends towards beneath the regional level, the sort of lower geographical levels can be really different within a region. So
it's
somewhere
the seaside towns sort of problem, isn't it? Which is a lot of
like
Newby.
Newby is a big kind of visitor destination. So the job centre there would identify seasonality as a major challenge for them, where 6 miles inland it's not. So it can vary hugely at that hyper local level. And when you think about people looking for work, they are often looking within their local community, within the area that they can travel to, and that is significantly different in a rural and coastal economy than it is in a city. So yeah, there aren't easy answers. A lot of work has gone into over the last couple of decades, really, into changing the nature of the hospitality industry. So working to develop more of a year-round appeal, extend the season, attract more international visitors who tend to spend a bit more money, do some of the sustainable ecotourism type stuff so that it's not also eroding some of the reasons people come here in the first place. But it also underlines why we need for resilient economies, we need diversity in their different employment sectors. There is risk anywhere, whether that's a small coastal town or a big city, of being highly dependent upon one big employer that may fold, or one sector that might not offer year-round opportunities. So
Thank you, Jessie. Lauren wants to come in, I can see.
Yeah, I'm just thinking about the visitor economy also as an opportunity as well as a challenge. So whilst we do obviously have this sort of seasonal, more precarious nature, that also presents flexibility, doesn't it, for some of our target cohorts within the Get Britain Working plans. Certainly in Cumbria, and I imagine Jessie in Cornwall as well, you'll have no doubt the incidence of sort of early retirement as a driver of inactivity. And so, whilst that's we have to be kind of clear on what levers we've got to try and encourage people back into work. It can present an opportunity, can't it, having those flexible employment opportunities. I think certainly there's some good examples in Cumbria where, I think, again, Isobel might be able to expand. There's Windermere Cruises, I think, have been very successful in bringing some of those older people in the workforce back into work to help meet particular skill gaps and challenges that they've had. And equally, I think Cumbria Tourism have been involved in a project called Welcome to Work in the visitor economy that's won various awards, and that's really sought to connect job seekers with employment opportunities in the Cumbria tourism sector, and really sort of targeting particular groups. So younger people, those over 50, individuals in deprived areas, care leavers and so forth. So it's had quite a targeted focus, and it's certainly been an example where we've looked to sort of learn the lessons of some of those initiatives as part of a review of evaluation evidence, and considering how can we use some of those initiatives to inform future activity. So we've got a sort of demand responsive solutions in place, but really sort of targeting particular groups where it might provide, an entry into work, giving people those experiences that they need, and help to tackle some of those skill shortages and gaps that employers are facing.
Yeah, thank you for that, Lauren. But I mean, you're absolutely correct in saying that 22% of the inactive workforce in Cumbria is due to retirement. Wonderful location. People come and retire because of all the things that go on, across the county. But that contributes to the overall numbers. And I'd forgotten to pick up on, you had mentioned earlier about the Cumbria commitment, and going into early 2026, we're in the process of trying to develop a platform that basically will look at how do we match volunteering opportunities, how do we match job opportunities, how do we match people with, no matter which age you are, with an opportunity that might actually work with, encourage you to come back. It doesn't have to be full time, and it doesn't have to be what we refer to as part time. You might decide to do something one afternoon a week or something like that, or you know where I'm coming from, or a couple of mornings a week, something like that, and it just encourages people to get active again.
If I may, I'd be really interested to hear from you both. I think you're absolutely right to emphasise flexibility as key to keeping people working when they might be managing other challenges in life, whether that's health or childcare or whatever. But we certainly heard from, Charlie Mayfield heard from local employers, but he didn't have a remit to make fiscal recommendations in his review. But the national insurance changes not only looked at the rate of insurance, but they also, at a very technical level, changed how headcount is counted. So it went from being FTE to decide whether you passed the threshold for the higher level of national insurance to headcount, number of employees. So that obviously introduced a real additional cost to our small businesses who offer part-time employment. So they very much wanted to continue doing that. They recognise all of those benefits of including people in the workforce and helping them have a full complement of staff with experienced backgrounds who might not be able to or want to work full time. But it did introduce a real additional cost onto it, and I think this just illustrates how some of those technical changes need to be really carefully considered.
And conscious is budget day tomorrow, and I know that the thing employers are probably most looking at is potential pension changes and what cost that might have. I'm conscious of time, and we need to wrap up for colleagues who have to run off to their meetings. So to sort of round us off, I'd just like to ask a question to you in terms of, for each of you, what one thing kind of stands out from today's discussion that you think you'd like to leave with the audience? Perhaps start with you, Laura.
Actually, I'm looking at one of the final points in the Q&A. I think helps in that regard, because there's a point, isn't there, around the reflections from the conversation today around some of those critical enablers here, that recognition of the importance of transport and housing and digital infrastructure and all of these things, that when we've got a plan that doesn't necessarily come with it direct resource, it's challenging, isn't it, to influence change. It's so dependent on the aligned strategies. So for me, it sort of really sort of brings home the importance of that partnership working, how you work to inform and be informed by those aligned strategies, and also the role of kind of shared outcomes. So shared outcomes sort of beyond just the Get Britain Working plan. How do you achieve a sort of shared outcome framework that reads right across those aligned strategies, really?
Thank you. That's grand. And Jessie?
So I would say thank you for hosting today. It's a learning and change event, and that for me is the main thing that we need in this space. It is, as Lauren was saying, this is all about culture and outcomes, not plans and process. There aren't any silver bullets. So sharing experience and keeping focused on outcomes and how we get there. We'll probably have to adapt many times along the way. So learning and change.
Thank you, Jessie. And Isobel?
I think if I had one thing I would leave with is that, this is not an easy task, because getting the plan done was, the areas did receive some financial resource from government to get plans done. But beyond that, this is all down to how do we actually work together to change culture? How do we work together to get shared outcomes? Because there's no big budget sitting behind this delivery, so the resource for this is stretched.
Thank you, and thank you to our panelists. And I hope it's been a really helpful insight into where we are with local Get Britain Working plans. It's challenged you, or it's just given you something to think about. Of course, the centre of this is the better employment outcomes. And the experience of individuals and families, and growing inclusive economy that will be good for all of us. So our advice and experience is here to make use of, so please do drop me a line. Delighted to have more conversations. I'll circulate a copy of this webinar to those registered and those who couldn't attend as well, and please do share that with colleagues. I'll also put a few of the resources that have been referenced along the way, so you can look those up as well. So finally, just to say a really big thank you to Isobel, to Jessie, and to Lauren, whose experience, expertise, and good humour has been really valuable today. And thank you also to you for joining us, and see you again soon.